Before donating $12 million to my son and daughter-in-law, I decided to test them. When he invited me to his wife's company grand opening, I showed up pretending to be a poor woman. As soon as I walked in, she glared at me and yelled, "Who authorized her entry? Get that beggar out." I only said one sentence that froze her in her tracks. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from. That way I can see how far my story has gone. My name is Dominga, and I'm 71 years old. For 5 decades, I was married to Eduardo, a man who built an empire from nothing and taught me that money doesn't change people, it only reveals who they truly are. When he died 2 years ago, he left me a fortune of $12 million and a promise I made on his deathbed, to take care of our only son, Rafael. But Rafael wasn't the same anymore. Everything started to change when he met Talia 3 years ago. At first, I thought it was just the typical infatuation of a 42-year-old man who had been single for too long. My son was always a romantic, someone who believed in true love and soulmates. Talia came into his life like a breath of fresh air, young, beautiful, and seemingly successful in her work as an image consultant. The first time I met her, she greeted me with a perfect smile and a hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds, no more. No less, as if she had timed the precise duration a hug needed to appear sincere without actually being so. "Mrs. Dominga," she said in a soft but calculated voice, "Rafael has told me so much about you. It's an honor to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful man." Her words were kind, but there was something in her eyes that I didn't like, a coldness that contrasted with the warmth of her voice. Eduardo used to say that the eyes never lie, and Talia's eyes told me she was evaluating me, gauging my worth, calculating something I couldn't yet decipher. For the first few months, I tried to convince myself that my suspicions were unfounded. Maybe it was just her nature. Maybe I was being too critical. But small details began to accumulate like drops of water that eventually form an ocean. When Rafael took me out to dinner to announce their engagement, I watched as Talia inspected the restaurant before sitting down. Her eyes scanned each table, assessing the other diners, the likely price of the menu, the quality of the tableware. She wasn't admiring the decor, she was calculating the cost. "This place is lovely," she commented, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Rafael has excellent taste in choosing appropriate places." Appropriate. That word echoed in my mind for days. Appropriate for what? For his image? For his social status? During dinner, Rafael spoke excitedly about his wedding plans, about how Talia had inspired him to dream bigger, to think about the future differently. She nodded enthusiastically, but every now and then her eyes wandered to my designer handbag, to my engagement ring that Eduardo had given me 50 years ago, to the watch that had belonged to my mother-in-law. "Rafael told me that you and your husband built a very successful business," Talia said to me at one point. "It must be reassuring to know that all that hard work will secure the future for generations to come." The way she said generations to come sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't talking about grandchildren or the family legacy in an emotional sense. She was talking about inheritance, money, numbers in a bank account. Rafael, completely oblivious to the implications of his fiancée's words, took my hand and smiled, with that innocence that, at 42, he still possessed. "Mom, Talia and I have been talking about the future. After we get married, we want to start a company together. She has brilliant ideas about image consulting, and I can contribute the business management expertise that Dad taught me." For the first time all evening, I saw Talia smile with genuine satisfaction. It wasn't a smile of love for Rafael, but of triumph, as if she had just won a very important bet. The months following that dinner were a succession of small revelations that confirmed my worst fears. Talia began making subtle comments about financial planning and smart investments. She always framed these conversations as being for Raphael's benefit, for their future together. But I could read between the lines. One day, while we were having tea at my house, she asked me directly about Eduardo's inheritance. "Mrs. Dominga, I hope you won't be uncomfortable with my question, but Raphael mentioned that Don Eduardo was very forward-thinking when it came to estate planning. It must be comforting to know he left everything well organized." Her tone was casual, as if she were asking about the weather, but her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. It was a question I had been expecting, waiting for the right moment to answer. "Eduardo was very careful with our affairs," I replied without going into specifics. "He believed in taking care of the family." "Of course," she agreed. "And I'm sure Raphael will honor that tradition when the time comes. He told me that you plan to make a significant donation when we get married." "How generous of you." That phrase hit me like a hammer. Raphael had never mentioned any specific donation for his marriage. The only conversation we'd had about it was when he asked me, in very general terms, what my plans were for his father's inheritance. I'd told him I wanted to make sure everything was well settled before making any decisions. But Talia spoke as if they'd already discussed specific numbers, as if they'd already made concrete plans for my money, as if it were a foregone conclusion that they would receive a large sum after the marriage. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every conversation, every glance, every seemingly innocent comment Talia had made over the past few months. All the pieces were beginning to form a very clear and very disturbing pattern. Talia hadn't fallen in love with Raphael, she'd fallen in love with his inheritance. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I needed to know for sure who the woman marrying my son really was. I needed irrefutable proof of her true intentions before handing over the $12 million Eduardo had worked his whole life to earn. If Talia really was the superficial and calculating woman I suspected, I had to find out before it was too late. Because once she married Raphael and had legal access to the family inheritance, it would be almost impossible to protect my son from the consequences of his terrible error in judgment. The question was, how could I test someone who had already proven herself a master of manipulation? The perfect opportunity came 3 weeks later when Raphael called excitedly to tell me about the grand opening of Talia's consulting firm. "Mom, Talia is finally launching her own company. She's been working so hard on this, investing all her savings, contacting potential clients. The launch event is going to be at the Meridian Hotel next Friday night. She wants you to come as a special guest." The enthusiasm in his voice broke my heart, because I knew exactly what that invitation meant. Talia didn't want me there as a beloved future mother-in-law. She wanted me there as the wealthy widow who would soon be part of the family. It was an introduction, a way of showcasing me to her future partners and clients as proof that she had access to money. "Of course I'll go, son," I told him. "It makes me so happy to see that Talia is chasing her dreams." But as I hung up the phone, I was already formulating a plan that would test exactly what kind of person my future daughter-in-law was. Over the next few days, I began preparing my experiment with the meticulousness Eduardo had taught me during our years of marriage. If I was going to expose Talia's true nature, I had to do it in a way that left no room for doubt or excuses. First, I researched everything I could about the event. I called the Meridian Hotel posing as a potential guest and got all the details. It would be an elegant reception in the main ballroom with cocktails and dinner. They were expecting approximately 150 guests, including local, business people, potential clients, and trade press. Perfect. The more people there were, the more authentic Talia's reaction would be. Then I began recalling all the conversations I had had with her over the past few months, looking for clues about her true feelings toward less fortunate people. I didn't have to look far. On one occasion, while we were having dinner out, a homeless man approached us asking for change as we were leaving the restaurant. Talia's reaction had been immediate and revealing. "How disgusting," she'd muttered as she quickened her pace. "This city should do something about those people. They tarnish the image of the nice neighborhoods." Raphael had tried to soften her comment. "Talia's just concerned about the safety of the area, right, darling?" "Of course," she'd replied quickly. "I just think there are more appropriate ways to help people in need than allowing them to loiter on the streets." But I had seen her initial expression. It hadn't been concern, it had been disgust, genuine revulsion towards someone she considered beneath her. On another occasion, we'd been discussing charitable donations when she remarked, "It's admirable to help the less fortunate, but you have to be smart about it. You can't just give money to anyone who asks. You have to make sure they really deserve it." Deserve it. As if poverty were a moral choice, rather than a circumstance. These memories crystallized my plan. If Talia held such contempt for people she considered lower class, how would she react if one of those people showed up at her elegant event? On Wednesday morning, I went shopping with a very specific purpose. Instead of heading to my usual stores in the upscale shopping district, I drove to the other side of town, to an area where I could buy second-hand clothes without being recognized. At a thrift store, I found exactly what I needed: a worn but clean coat, a faded skirt, a blouse that had seen better days, and comfortable but clearly old shoes. I also bought a small, threadbare handbag and a faded scarf to cover my perfectly styled hair. As I tried on the clothes in the store's tiny dressing room, I looked at myself in the cracked mirror and barely recognized myself. The transformation was more complete than I had expected. I no longer resembled Dominga Herrera, the elegant 71-year-old widow with $12 million in the bank. I looked like an older woman who had seen hard times, someone who had perhaps lost her home, her family, her stability. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a way, that woman in the mirror was who I truly was inside, someone who had lost her life partner and was now fighting to protect the only thing she had left of that life, her son. On Thursday night, I went over every detail of my plan. I would arrive at the event an hour after the official start time, when there were enough people there for my entry to be checked, but not so late that the event was winding down. I would enter through the main entrance, not some back door, because I wanted Talia to see me arrive. I wouldn't carry any identification that could reveal my true identity if someone decided to check who I was. I would have only a few dollars in cash in my used wallet. Enough to look authentic, but not so much as to arouse suspicion. My story, if anyone asked, would be simple. I was an older woman who had seen the event advertised in the newspaper and thought they might be able to offer me some cleaning or service work. I had recently lost my job and was desperate to find work. It was a story believable enough to justify my presence, but humble enough to elicit exactly the kind of reaction I hoped for from Talia. That night, I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. Part of me hoped I was wrong about Talia. Part of me wanted my future daughter-in-law to prove to be a better person than I suspected, that perhaps her earlier comments had been misinterpreted or taken out of context. But a deeper part of me, the part that had learned to read people during 5 decades of marriage to a businessman, knew my instincts were right. Talia had shown her true colors on multiple occasions. She just needed the right situation for them to be undeniably apparent. On Friday morning, I woke up with an eerie calm. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't anxious, I was determined. This test wasn't just about the money, although $12 million is no small amount. It was about my son's future, about protecting him from someone who could destroy not only his financial stability but also his faith in love and in people. During the day, I maintained my normal routines. I went to the bank, did some shopping, had lunch with a friend, but in the back of my mind, I was mentally rehearsing every step of what I would do that night. At 5 p.m., I began my transformation. First, I removed all my makeup and washed my hair completely. Then I dressed in the second-hand clothes I had bought, making sure every detail was convincing: the worn coat, the slightly oversized skirt, the shoes that had walked many miles. Finally, I covered my hair with the faded scarf and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The transformation was complete. It was time to discover who the woman marrying my son really was. As I drove toward the Meridian Hotel in my more modest car, not the Mercedes I usually drove, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness because I expected tonight to confirm my worst suspicions about Talia, determination because, no matter what I discovered, I would do everything in my power to protect Raphael from the consequences of his emotional blindness. The moment of truth had arrived. The Meridian Hotel gleamed like a palace that Friday night. Golden lights reflected in the glass windows, and a red carpet stretched from the main entrance to the sidewalk. Men in sharp suits and women in designer gowns strolled toward the building, their laughter mingling with the soft sound of music drifting from within. I parked my car in the back of the parking garage and walked slowly toward the entrance. With each step, I felt my disguise transforming me, not just physically, but mentally. I no longer walked with the confidence of a wealthy woman, I walked with the caution of someone unsure of being welcome. At the entrance, a young man in a suit looked at me with poorly concealed surprise. His eyes scanned my worn coat, my faded skirt, my old shoes. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said with a forced smile. "Do you have an invitation?" "I came because I saw the ad in the newspaper," I replied timidly, playing my part. "I thought, maybe you needed help cleaning or something." The young man frowned and looked inside, clearly uncomfortable. Before he could answer, an older woman who worked at the event approached. "What's going on here?" she asked. "This lady is looking for a job," the young man explained. The woman looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Ma'am, this is a private opening event," she said. "If you're looking for a job, you should speak with the hotel's human resources department during office hours." "I just wanted to ask," I insisted gently. "I've been looking for work for months, and I thought, maybe, for a moment, I thought they were going to ask me to leave before I could even enter the ballroom. But then I heard a familiar voice that made me catch my breath. What's going on here?" It was Raphael. My son was approaching with a curious smile, clearly oblivious to the situation. He was wearing his best suit, the one we had bought together for special occasions, and he looked happy and relaxed. "This lady is looking for a job," the hotel woman explained. Raphael looked at me with the kindness that had always characterized him. For a terrible second, I thought he would recognize me despite the disguise, but the transformation had been more complete than I imagined. To him, I was simply an elderly woman in a difficult situation. "Oh," Raphael said, his expression softening with compassion. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about your situation, but this event is for the grand opening of my wife's company. However, let me speak with the hotel manager. Perhaps they can point you toward opportunities." My heart swelled with pride and pain at the same time. Pride because my son had proven to be exactly the compassionate man Eduardo and I had raised. Pain because I knew that very kindness was what made him vulnerable to Talia's manipulation. "You're very kind," I said, keeping my voice disguised. "I just wanted to ask." Raphael smiled and was heading inside to find the manager when another voice cut through the air like a razor. "Raphael, what are you doing out there?" Talia appeared in the doorway, radiant in a champagne-colored silk dress that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. Her hair was styled to perfection, her makeup flawless, and she wore jewelry that sparkled under the hotel lights. "Honey, I was just helping this lady who..." Talia didn't let him finish. Her eyes fell on me, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just surprise or discomfort, it was pure disgust, visceral revulsion, as if she had found something repugnant at her perfect event. "Who authorized her entry?" she asked, her voice loud and sharp, directed at the hotel staff. "How did you allow this person to get in here?" Silence spread like an oil slick. People nearby began to turn to see what was happening. Raphael looked confused and embarrassed by his wife's reaction. "Talia, she just wanted a job," he began to explain. "I don't care what she wants," Talia shouted, her mask of elegance completely slipping. "This is unacceptable. This is my event, my special night, and I'm not going to let some beggar ruin it." Beggar. The word echoed in the air like a slap in the face. All around us, conversation stopped. Guests stood motionless, some with their champagne glasses halfway to their lips, all watching the scene unfold. "Get this beggar out of here immediately," Talia continued, her voice rising an octave. "I don't want to see these disgusting people at my event. This is an elegant place, not a haven for vagrants." Raphael went pale. "Talia, please, you don't have to talk to her like that. Don't tell me how to talk," she yelled at her own husband. "You don't understand these things. These people come here to ruin everything we've worked so hard to build. Look at her, she's filthy, she smells bad, and she probably has diseases." Each word was like a knife, but not to me, to Raphael. I saw his expression change from confusion to shock, from shock to horror. In that moment, he was seeing for the first time who the woman he had married really was. "Security!" Talia shouted, waving her hands dramatically. "Call security and get this woman out, and I want to know how this happened. Someone's going to lose their job tonight." The hotel security guards approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them gave me an apologetic look. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you're going to have to leave." Well, this was it. I had seen everything I needed to see. Talia had revealed her true nature in the most public and humiliating way possible. There were no doubts, no excuses, no way to misinterpret what had happened. Slowly, I removed the scarf covering my hair. My silver hair, perfectly styled beneath the disguise, fell over my shoulders. Then I took off my worn coat, revealing a silk blouse underneath that clearly didn't belong to a woman living in poverty. The silence that followed was deafening. Talia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Raphael took a step back, his eyes widening with shock and recognition. "Hello, Talia," I said in my normal, clear, and firm voice. "I'm Dominga Herrera, your mother-in-law." The color drained completely from her face. Around us, the guests began to murmur. Some pulled out their phones to record. News of what had happened would spread like wildfire. "Mom," Raphael whispered, his voice breaking. "What? What are you doing?" I kept my eyes on Talia as I answered. I was trying to figure out exactly what kind of person married my son. Talia tried to recover. She tried to find something to say that could explain or justify what she had done. But there was nothing she could say. Her own words had condemned her. In front of all her guests, potential partners, and the press she had invited to cover her big night. I didn't know, she began to stammer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You didn't know who I was, I said calmly, but you knew exactly what you were doing. You called me a beggar. Disgusting. You said I probably have diseases. You said my presence would ruin your elegant event. Raphael looked as if he had been physically assaulted. Talia, how could you speak to anyone like that? How could you be so cruel? But I wasn't finished yet. This had only been the first part of the test. Talia had failed, spectacularly, but there was something else I needed to know, something I had been suspecting for months, and tonight would help me confirm it. Because if Talia was capable of such cruelty toward a stranger she believed to be vulnerable, what was she capable of doing to the people she supposedly loved? We have a lot to talk about, I told Raphael, my voice heavy with implications he couldn't yet grasp. The three of us. The presidential suite at the Meridian Hotel felt like a torture chamber as the three of us sat in the elegant private lounge Talia had reserved for after the event. The irony was not lost on me. She had planned to celebrate her big night here, and instead, it had become the place where her world would begin to unravel. Raphael had removed his jacket and loosened his tie. His hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a whiskey from the minibar. Talia stood by the window, still in her champagne-colored silk dress, but her perfect posture had collapsed. She no longer resembled the powerful, controlled woman she had pretended to be for the past 3 years. Mom, Raphael said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. I need to understand what just happened down there. Why did you do that? Why did you dress like that? I sat on the velvet sofa, maintaining my composure, even though my heart was breaking for my son. Because I needed to know who the woman you married really was before making a very important decision about our family's future. Talia turned abruptly from the window. This is ridiculous, she snapped. It was a cruel and manipulative test. No one reacts normally in such an artificial situation. Artificial? I repeated, keeping my voice calm. Talia, an elderly woman in a difficult situation, approached you asking for work. Your reaction was to call her a beggar, disgusting, to say she had diseases. Is that your normal reaction to vulnerable people? Raphael slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Talia, the things you said. I've never seen you like that before. I was protecting my event. Talia cried, desperation creeping into her voice. I've worked 4 months to make everything perfect. I had important investors there, press, potential clients. I couldn't let a situation like that ruin everything. Ruin everything? I asked gently. Would an older woman asking for a job ruin your whole event? Or were you more worried about your guests seeing who you really are when you're not acting? Talia opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she was at a loss for words. Raphael raised his head and looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. But, Mom, why was this test necessary? What important decision did you have to make? It was the moment I'd been both dreading and waiting for. The moment to reveal not only what I discovered that night, but everything I'd been investigating for the past few weeks. Your father left me $12 million, Raphael. Before he died, we talked about our wishes for the future. He wanted you to be financially secure when you got married, to have the resources to build the life you wanted with your wife. I saw Talia's eyes light up for a second before she could control her expression. Even in this moment of crisis, the mention of money had immediately captured her attention. I had planned to give you millions of dollars as a wedding gift, I continued, watching both of their faces. But in recent weeks, I've been having doubts about Talia's true motives. What kind of doubts? Raphael asked, though from his tone he seemed to already suspect the answer. I took a manila envelope from my bag, the one I'd been carrying for the past 3 weeks. Since deciding to conduct this test, I'd also been doing other research that had revealed truths even more disturbing than Talia's cruelty. I hired a private investigator, I said, feeling the weight of the words. Because some things about Talia's life didn't add up, her work history, her finances, her past relationships. The color drained from Talia's face. You had no right to investigate my private life, she hissed. I had every right, I replied firmly. When someone is about to receive $10 million from my family, I have the right to know who that person is. I opened the envelope and took out a series of photographs and documents. My hand trembled, slightly, not from nerves, but from the pent-up anger I'd been carrying for days. Raphael, I said gently, there's something you need to see. I handed him the first photograph. It was of Talia leaving an elegant restaurant, but she wasn't alone. She was with a man who was clearly not my son, and the way they were touching, kissing, embracing left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Raphael stared at the photo for a long moment. When he looked up, his face was completely pale. Who is he? His name is Mauricio Vega. I replied, pulling more documents from the envelope. He's a lawyer specializing in family and estate law. They'd been seeing each other for the past 8 months. Talia remained completely still by the window. She didn't deny it, didn't protest, didn't try to explain. She was just waiting. There's more, I continued, handing Raphael another set of documents. Your wife has been consulting with Mr. Vega about divorce laws in our state, specifically about how a divorce would work after receiving a substantial inheritance. Raphael dropped the papers as if they were burning his hands. No. This can't be true. Here are the dates of their meetings, I said, pointing to the documents. They began 3 weeks after your marriage. The specific question she asked was whether an inheritance received during the marriage would be considered marital or individual property in the event of a divorce. The room was filled with a silence so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Raphael remained completely still, staring at the documents as if they were written in another language. I didn't stop there, I said quietly. I also had your investigator look into Talia's business, finances, the company we just inaugurated tonight. Do you know where the initial capital came from? Raphael shook his head, the movement so small it was barely visible. From a loan she took out using the expectation of our inheritance as collateral. She told the bank she would be receiving a substantial sum after the marriage and used that promise to get financing. Finally, Talia spoke. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it was full of venom. Prove any of that. I looked her straight in the eyes. Do you really want me to prove everything, Talia? Do you want me to tell Raphael about the conversations the investigator recorded between you and Mauricio? About the specific plans you made for after the divorce? For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Raphael stood up slowly, like a man much older than his 42 years. I want to hear it, he said in a voice I barely recognized. Every detail. I took a small recorder from the envelope. The investigator had managed to record this conversation the previous week at the restaurant where they met. I pressed play, and Talia's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Once I get the money from the old woman, we wait 6 months so it doesn't look suspicious, and then I start the divorce proceedings. With 10 million, even if I only keep half, that's 5 million. More than enough to start our life together. Mauricio's voice responded, and you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Raphael seems like a good man. He's an idiot, Talia had replied with a cruel laugh. He's so in love he'd believe anything I tell him. And his mother is a sentimental old fool. As soon as she sees how happy I am in the marriage, she'll hand over the money. The recorder continued for another 30 seconds, detailing exactly how they planned to manipulate the legal situation to maximize what Talia could walk away with in the divorce. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Raphael walked slowly toward the window where Talia stood. She stepped back, but he didn't reach out to touch her. He just stood there, looking at her as if she were a complete stranger. "Did you ever love me?" he asked quietly. Talia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And in that silence, Raphael found his answer. He turned and walked toward the door of the suite. "I want you to leave," he said without turning back. "I want you to pack your things from the house and be gone tonight." "Raphael, wait," Talia said, finally finding her voice. "We can talk about this, can I explain?" He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. "There's nothing to explain," he said. "You've been lying about everything since the moment we met." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the woman who had been about to destroy my son's life. But it still wasn't over. Because Talia had committed more than adultery and plotted divorce. She had made a mistake that would cost her far more than she had ever imagined. I remained alone with Talia in the presidential suite. The silence between us stretched like a battlefield after the war. She was still by the window, but her posture had completely changed. She was no longer the elegant, controlled woman I had met 3 years earlier. She was cornered, desperate, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "Are you satisfied?" she finally asked, her voice thick with resentment. "Does destroying my marriage make you feel better?" I looked at her with a calm that surprised even me. "I didn't destroy your marriage, Talia. You did, from the moment you decided to marry my son, for his money. You don't know anything about us," she snapped, turning toward me with eyes blazing. "Raphael and I had something real. We have something real." "Real?" I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my chest. "Would you call it real to plan to divorce him before your first anniversary? To call him an idiot with your lover?" Her mask of indignation cracked for a moment. "Things aren't that simple," she muttered. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the expectations of getting $10 million. I cut in. "Those expectations, I understand, perfectly." Talia moved away from the window and began pacing the room like a caged animal. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. A nervous rhythm that betrayed her growing panic. "You know what?" she said suddenly, stopping and facing me. "You're right. I married Raphael because I knew he was rich. So what? Does that make me a monster? How many women have married for financial security throughout history? The difference," I said coldly, "is that those women were at least honest with themselves about their motivations. You've been living a lie for 3 years. It was a lie that worked," she shouted, completely losing control. Raphael was happy. I did my job as a wife. I kept the house perfect. I attended events with him. I was exactly what he wanted. While you planned to rob him and abandon him. It's not robbery, she said, her cheeks flushed with anger. It's divorce law. I'm entitled to half the marital assets. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 71 years, but also the strength of someone who has fought all her life to protect her family. You're not going to get a single cent, I said with a smile that had nothing kind in it. Because there's something else you don't know about my investigations. Talia went still. What are you talking about? I pulled another document from the manila envelope, one I had been saving for this precise moment. Did you know your lover, Mauricio Vega, is married? I asked. I watched her face turn pale. That doesn't matter, she stammered. He's going to divorce her. Did he tell you that? I asked sweetly. Because according to my investigator, he's told the exact same thing to at least 3 other women in the last 5 years. All of them married to wealthy men. All of them planning lucrative divorces. Talia recoiled as if I had slapped her. You're lying. Do you want to see the photos of him with the other women? The records of his other legal consultations? I asked. Mauricio has a very specific method, Talia. He targets women married to money, seduces them, helps them plan advantageous divorces, and then disappears with his cut once it's all over. Talia's legs seemed to give out. She sank heavily into a chair, her hands trembling. But there's more, I continued, not giving her time to fully process the information. Remember I mentioned I looked into your company's finances? The loan you got using our expected inheritance as collateral? She stared at me, not understanding where I was going. The bank requires that loan to be repaid within the next 60 days if the promised inheritance doesn't materialize. Since you're no longer going to receive any money from our family, you will very soon be bankrupt. I can get other investors, she said weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. After what happened tonight? After all your potential investors saw you treat an older woman like garbage? Do you really think anyone will want to do business with you now? Talia buried her face in her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of her situation. In a single night, she had lost her marriage, her company, her lover, and any chance of getting the money she had been chasing for 3 years. And there's one more thing, I added, my voice now soft but unyielding. I took an additional precaution. Before coming here tonight, I changed my will. Her hands dropped from her face. What? All my money, including the $12 million, now goes to a charitable foundation that helps older women in vulnerable situations, I said. Women like the one I pretended to be. Tonight, women who might cross paths with people like you. The irony was perfect, and we both knew it. The money Talia had been chasing for years would now go directly to help the very kind of people she despised. Raphael will still be my heir, I continued. But only after he proves that he's learned to choose his partners more wisely, after he shows that he can tell the difference between real love and manipulation. Talia staggered to her feet. You can't do that. Raphael is your son. He has a right to that inheritance. Raphael will have his inheritance when he's ready to handle it wisely, when he can see people for who they really are, instead of who they pretend to be. I walked toward the door, feeling that my work here was done. But before leaving, I turned one last time. Oh, one more thing, Talia. I'll be suggesting to Raphael that he hire his own divorce lawyer. Very good one who specializes in cases involving adultery and marital fraud. With all the evidence we have, it's very possible that not only will you walk away with nothing, but you might also end up paying him. I left Talia alone in the suite, knowing her perfectly constructed world had completely collapsed. As I waited for the elevator, I thought of Eduardo and how proud he would be to know I had protected our son from someone who would have destroyed not only his financial stability, but his ability to trust and love. The elevator arrived, and as I descended to the lobby, I felt lighter than I had in years. The test was over. And though the results were painful, they had been necessary. Raphael would need time to heal, time to understand how thoroughly he had been manipulated. But he was a good man, with a good heart, and in time, he would find someone who loved him, for who he was, not for what he could give. As for Talia, she would have to face the consequences of her choices. For the first time in her life, there would be no one to rescue her, no one to manipulate, no one to exploit. Just as sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. And tonight, it had arrived disguised as an older woman in used clothes, exposing the truth that had been hidden beneath years of carefully crafted lies. But there was still one more conversation to have, the most important of all, the conversation with my son about how to rebuild his life after discovering that the last 3 years had been an elaborate lie. 6 months later, I sat in the garden of my house watching Raphael as he pruned the rose bushes Eduardo had planted decades earlier. My son had moved in with me temporarily after the divorce, not because he needed financial support, but because we both needed time to heal, together. The past months had been difficult for him. The divorce process had been exactly as brutal as I had warned. Mauricio Vega had disappeared as soon as legal trouble began to surface, leaving Talia completely alone to face the consequences of her actions. The bank had called in the loan. She had lost everything and, in the end, had indeed been ordered to pay Raphael compensation for marital fraud. But more than legal vindication, what had helped Raphael heal was understanding that his kindness had not been a weakness. His capacity to love and trust was not something to be ashamed of, even if it had been exploited. "Mom," he said as he walked toward me, taking off his gardening gloves. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for months." I straightened in my chair, preparing for another serious conversation. We'd had many during these months of healing. "Thank you," he said simply, sitting in the chair next to mine, "for saving me from something that would have destroyed my life." "Don't thank me for protecting you," I replied, touching his hand. "It's what mothers do." "Not every mother would have had the courage to do what you did," he said. "Not every mother would have risked her relationship with her son to save it." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. "Your father taught me that loving someone sometimes means doing hard things to protect them, even if they don't understand in the moment." Raphael fell silent for a moment, looking at the rose bushes he had just trimmed. "Have you heard anything else about Talia?" he asked. "I heard she moved to another city," I said. "Probably to start over somewhere no one knows her story." "Do you think she learned anything from all of this?" It was a question I had asked myself many times. "I don't know, son," I answered honestly. "Some people learn from their mistakes. Others just look for new victims. But that's no longer our responsibility." Raphael nodded, and I could see he had finally made peace with what had happened. There was no anger in his eyes now, no bitterness, only a new wisdom that he hadn't had before. "I have something to tell you," I continued, knowing it was time for the conversation I had been postponing about the inheritance. His eyes turned toward me with curiosity. "I've decided to change my will again," I said. "Half of the money will still go to the foundation for older women. That part won't change. But the other half, $6 million, will be yours when you turn 45. Mom, you don't have to, let me finish, I interrupted gently. There are conditions. He smiled, a real smile I hadn't seen since before he met Talia. Of course there are, he said. First condition, you have to be single for at least 2 more years. You need time to remember who you are when you're not trying to please someone else. That won't be hard, he said with a sad smile. I don't think I'll be ready to trust someone new for a long time. You will be, I assured him. When the right person comes along, you'll know. And this time, you'll trust your instincts as well as your heart. Second condition, you have to work with me at the foundation for at least a year. I want you to see, face to face, the women we help, to understand why it was so important to protect you from someone who despised them. Raphael leaned forward, interested. I'd like that, he said. What kind of work do we do? For the next hour, I told him about the Golden Hope Foundation I had established with part of Eduardo's inheritance. We provide temporary housing for older women who have lost their homes, job training programs for those who need to start over after 60, and legal assistance for women who have been victims of financial abuse by family members. Every woman we help, I explained, could have been the woman I pretended to be that night, vulnerable, in need, deserving of dignity and respect, not contempt. Talia would have despised all of this, Raphael murmured. Exactly, I said. And that was the difference between you two that you couldn't see. You would want to help these women. She saw them as something dirty that would ruin her perfect image. As the sun began to set, Raphael and I remained in the garden, planning his future work with the foundation. For the first time in years, I could see in his eyes the man Eduardo and I had raised, compassionate, generous, strong but humble. There's one more thing, he said as we got ready to go inside. I've been thinking about moving back here permanently with you. I looked at him in surprise. Son, you're a grown man. You don't need to take care of your mother. It's not about taking care of you, he said with a smile. It's about not wasting more time. I spent 3 years living with someone who never truly knew me and never wanted to. You've known me my whole life and still choose to have me close. Why would I look for anything better than that? I felt tears sting my eyes. Your father would be so proud of the man you've become, I whispered. I hope I become the kind of man who can tell the difference between real love and manipulation, he said. The kind of man who can raise children who will never be victims of someone like Talia. That night, as I prepared dinner for the two of us, I reflected on everything that had changed since that night at the Meridian Hotel. Raphael had lost a wife, but he had gained something far more valuable, the ability to see clearly. He had lost his illusions about a perfect marriage, but he had gained wisdom about real love. And I had fulfilled the promise I made to Eduardo on his deathbed. I had protected our son, not only from losing his inheritance, but from losing his soul in the hands of someone who never truly valued him. 3 years after that night, Raphael met Carmen, a primary school teacher who volunteered at our foundation on weekends. The first time he brought her home for dinner, I watched how she looked at him when he quietly got up to fill the dog's water bowl without being asked. How she smiled when he insisted on washing the dishes after dinner. How she listened, genuinely interested, when he talked about his work with the women at the foundation. But most importantly, I watched how he looked at her, with respect, with admiration, with the kind of love that didn't need pretending or performance. The kind of love Eduardo and I had shared for 50 years. On their wedding day, a simple ceremony in our garden, among the rose bushes Eduardo had planted, I sat in the front row wearing the same dress I had worn at my own wedding 5 decades earlier. As I watched my son promise to love and honor a woman who truly knew and valued him, I felt that my work was finally complete. Talia had taught me that money reveals people's true character. But Carmen taught me that real love doesn't need to be revealed, because it never hides. And as Raphael and Carmen exchanged vows under the golden evening sky, I knew Eduardo was smiling from somewhere, proud of the family we had protected and the future that was now, finally, in the right hands. The test had ended long ago. Now, at last, I could rest in the quiet certainty that love had triumphed over manipulation, and that the truth, however painful, is always worth it in the end.